Welcome to episode 7 in my restorative gardening series here. And in today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you how to make compost. Now, if this is the first video that you're joining on for, my name is Jordan and I founded a company called Mind and Soil in 2020 with the hope and intention of introducing 1 million individuals to gardening's mental health benefits. So not only do I want to be helping you grow and create a beautiful garden and be enjoying all kinds of fruits and vegetables and flowers, but I also want to help you do so in a way that brings you more peacefulness, more joy, and more restoration. And so with that in mind, I really encourage you to actually go back through the videos in this series at some point in time, because I've covered a number of topics such as how to go about planning your garden for the season ahead, how to be starting your seeds indoors, how to grow many crops such as broccoli, potatoes, bush beans, and more. And so spend some time going through those resources as well, because I think that they will end up taking a lot of the questions out of your mind and help you all throughout the season. But for today's video, I'm entirely focused on helping you learn how to make really great compost. And I absolutely love compost because effectively what we're doing is taking things that otherwise would be scraps that have really no value or purpose, and we're turning them into one of the most amazing resources that we can be putting into our garden beds for our plants to absolutely thrive. So there's something that I just love about that concept of taking a waste product and turning it into something incredibly valuable. And so the way that I'm going to go about covering this topic is by breaking it down into 5 steps to make compost. And before even diving into those 5 steps for making compost, I actually want to take a bit of a step back and really think through, what do plants need in order to really thrive? And really it breaks down into 4 areas. They need sun, they need warmth, they need water, and they need nutrients. And now let's focus on the last of those 4, the nutrients. The next question really becomes, what nutrients do my plants need in order to really thrive? And this breaks down into 2 primary categories, macronutrients and micronutrients. So from a macronutrient perspective, this is effectively our nitrogen, our phosphorus, and our potassium. And when you go to a garden center and you look at a bag of soil, and if it has 3 numbers on there like 444 or 284 or 20, that is just the NPK, the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium reading on that particular amendment. So those are the macronutrients that you would be looking at. But then we also have our micronutrients, and on this front, our plants are also needing kind of trace or smaller amounts of calcium, magnesium, zinc, iron, and more. So if we then know that our plants need macronutrients and micronutrients, well, the next question is okay, well, where do those come from? How do those ultimately get into the garden? And there's probably 3 primary sources for how this happens. The first option would be chemical fertilizers. And this is something that I personally stay away from on my end. And ultimately, this is an effective method. If you put chemicals into your garden beds, your plants are going to put on a whole bunch of growth at once. But the way that I would encourage you to think about it is kind of like it's a sugar rush. And so ultimately you're giving this processed sugar rush to a baby or a child. They're gonna have a big burst of energy, but then there's gonna be a crash afterwards. Likewise with our plants, they're going to put on a whole bunch of growth all at once right when you do that feeding, but then there's gonna be a big crash afterwards and the plant's all of a sudden not going to be growing as well unless you give it another big sugar rush. So that option, not a huge fan of. Now the next option would be organic and natural fertilizers. And on this front, it's kind of like going from, a sugar rush to now utilizing a vitamin. So once again, they're really, really great, but we couldn't survive off of just vitamins. Ultimately we need much more than that. And likewise with our plants growing in the garden, they absolutely will benefit from having an organic fertilizer. However, we also need to ensure that they're planted into a really good soil. So if we had a soil that was really, really heavy in clay or in sand, and we just put the organic fertilizer into that, well, they're still going to have a really tough time growing just because the soil medium that they're living in is really, really challenging. And what we need to do with that soil is actually add fertility and organic matter into it so that the plants can have an easier time growing. And the way that we do that is through our 3rd and final amendment, which is compost. And see, compost is pretty much just organic materials such as banana peels, eggshells, coffee grounds, garden waste, leaves, and more. And what happens over time is that each of these materials breaks down until ultimately it becomes compost. But remember those macronutrients and those micronutrients, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, potassium, the calcium, the zinc, etc. Well, what's so cool about compost is that banana peel, it had potassium in it. Those coffee grounds that are decomposing, those have nitrogen in them. The eggshells that we put into our compost, they're packed with calcium. So not only are we getting this really beautiful medium to be building our soil foundation, but it's also jam-packed with nutrients for our plants to be putting to use. So with compost, we're accomplishing really two things. On one hand, we're mixing it into the sand or that silt or that clay to create this really, really beautiful soil foundation that plants have a really easy time growing in. And then on top of that, it's jam-packed with nutrients and microbial life that the plants will be needing and ultimately putting to use for them to put on all of their growth over the season ahead. So compost, it's one of the absolute best things that you can be doing, creating, and ultimately it's basically entirely free because it is all just scraps that generally are getting thrown out or put into green bins, etc. Now the thing though is that the majority of compost at home are actually pretty bad, and that's because they're just not kind of taken care of or set up in the right way. And so what I now want to walk you through are the 5 steps that I utilize not only to make compost, but to make better compost at home. And the very first step on this front is to collect good materials. Let's actually start right in the kitchen because a majority of the things in our kitchen are going to be absolutely amazing composting materials. So things like banana peels, coffee grounds, eggshells, leafy greens, and more. Those are going to be absolutely amazing things for our compost. We totally want to be utilizing those. However, there are 3 things that we don't want to have going from the kitchen into our compost. And those are anything that are oily, any meats and bones, as well as any dairy products. And the reason why is that these just take a really long time to break down and ultimately are going to be attracting a lot of pests. So if you did have an absolutely huge composting operation and you're doing thousands and thousands of pounds, then absolutely you could compost these materials. But the vast majority of the time in backyard environments, it's just not a large enough setup to be effectively composting those materials. So continue just putting those ones into your landfill bin, and we won't worry about composting those. Ultimately, it would probably just create more problems, more issues than it would be worthwhile. But the rest of the things, we do want to be utilizing those. So I'm going to take those from my kitchen and I'm just going to toss them into my wheelbarrow to begin collecting those good materials. Now from there, let's head out to the garden. And again, on the garden front, the vast majority of the things in the garden are going to be amazing materials for composting. However, there are a couple of things that we do not want to put into the compost. So those good materials such as the banana peels, coffee grounds, eggshells, I'm just gonna pop those into my wheelbarrow and we're gonna begin building a little pile of really great materials. And the next place that we're going to go for this is over towards the garden. And the vast majority of the things in the garden are going to be really great compostable materials as well. However, there are 2 things that we want to veer clear of. The first are any of the invasive plants that ultimately spread via the root system. So plants such as mint, morning glory, and horseradish. And ultimately, I keep those out of my compost pile because if we put any of those into our compost and there is root matter in there, then it's gonna have a really easy time ultimately continuing to grow. And then as a result, when we spread that compost throughout our garden, we're gonna be spreading each one of those crops into all of our different beds. And it's really, really difficult to get them out at that point in time. So with those ones, I just pop those into my kind of like green waste bin that would go off to the municipality and they take care of composting those at their much larger facility that they have. And the second garden material that you might want to avoid putting into your compost is anything with a lot of seeds in it, such as sunflowers, cucumbers, tomatoes, etc. And it's not as big of an issue, but what's going to happen with these ones is that as that cucumber or as that tomato decomposes, a lot of it's just going to turn into compost, but then the seeds will all be in your compost pile. So now when you go to spread that compost and it's got all these tomato seeds or cucumber seeds, well, they also are going to germinate and begin growing, and you're going to end up with all these volunteer tomato plants and cucumber plants all throughout your garden. Now, the good news about this is that if that does happen, you can simply weed those out, and since they are not invasive and they don't spread by their roots, once you remove the one plant, you're fine. It's just introducing a little bit more work to you if they do end up in your compost. So kind of leave that one at your discretion. Absolutely not the end of the world if there are some seeds in your compost. Just means that there will be a little bit of weeding at a later point in time. So the way that I go about kind of separating these two is that when I am taking plants out of my garden, I always have my wheelbarrow and a 5-gallon pail. And with the 5-gallon pail, I'm putting any of those things with seeds or any of those invasive plants. So I pop the sunflower heads off, I take any kind of like remaining cucumbers that have gone mushy or anything along those lines, and I put them into my 5-gallon pail as well. And then I would just be dumping that pail into my municipality green waste bin so that none of that is ending up in my compost. Now, once I've removed all of those seeds, I'm then also going to take all of the plant matter and put that into my wheelbarrow, because that is the compostable material that I'm looking for and that I'm wanting to ultimately have in my compost pile. So by separating those two, I'm ending up with a wheelbarrow that's just going to be full of really great compostable materials that ultimately are going to serve as the foundation of my compost. And as you can see, I have a really big wheelbarrow full of all kinds of good material now. And this is actually where a lot of folks will kind of go wrong, is that they'll start just kind of breaking this down, putting it into their composting bin or pile and leave it at that. But the thing is that all of these materials are fairly high in nitrogen, and we want to have a balanced pile of equal parts nitrogen and equal parts carbon sources. So the second step for making better compost is to collect carbon materials. And the reason why we're doing this is because any of those kind of materials that we've grabbed, such as the foliage or the kitchen scraps, they're going to be very high in nitrogen. And what happens when we put just these materials into that compost bin or pile is that they get really, really wet and then ultimately turn into that kind of stinky compost pile that I'm sure every one of us has smelled. What we're smelling in that instance is an anaerobic compost pile. So there's no oxygen in there. And what that means is that there's different anaerobic bacteria and microorganisms that can be breeding and thriving, and those aren't nearly as beneficial for our garden as the aerobic microbial life that we're looking for. So what we need to be doing is collecting carbon materials that we can then add to this pile. And you might be wondering, well, Jordan, what are some of the different carbon materials that I can be utilizing in my pile? And on that front, 3 of my favorites are cardboard, potting soil, and leaves. And my personal favorite, without a doubt, are leaves. So when we get into the fall time and all the leaves are falling down from the trees, this is absolutely amazing because these are going to be such a valuable resource for us in making great compost. So all that you need to do is basically go out to your yard and rake up a whole bunch of the leaves, put them into a storage tote. And what I encourage you to do is rake up as much as you can, even potentially go to your neighbors or even to local parks where they might be getting rid of some of those leaves, and rake a bunch of those up and create a big pile at home, because now you're gonna have a little reserve that you can tap into as you continue to make compost over the course of the year. So keep in mind that leaves are ultimately gonna end up being very beneficial to your garden. So now I've got all of my carbon material in the form of leaves on hand, and I've got all of my nitrogen materials in the form of the garden scraps and the kitchen scraps. So I've got everything that I need to begin building my compost pile. However, I don't actually want to just throw these all together at once, but rather what I encourage you to do is step 3, which is chop, chop, chop. And the reason why I encourage you to do this is really like twofold. So the first one is that we're gonna have some really big pieces of organic material in there, such as sunflower stems or broccoli stems. And if we don't break these down, they are gonna take a really long time to ultimately decompose. They're just gonna remain as these really big kind of like sticks in our compost. But when we break them down, ultimately what we're doing is we're massively, massively, massively increasing the amount of surface area that is available to the microorganisms that are living in our compost pile and going to be working away at breaking that down into a finished compost product. So by breaking it down into smaller pieces, you're ultimately making it easier for those microorganisms to break it down. And then the second reason why I encourage you to chop things up is because it's ultimately going to result in a much smaller particle size. And ultimately, this is going to create kind of a more uniform finished compost product on your end, because everything is going to be broken down, similar size, and that's going to also make it easier to then be applying and be utilizing in your garden. So I just kind of like to think that it's kind of resulting in a better finished compost product and easier to work with in the garden. Now, as you do that, what I encourage you to keep in mind is to think of this as an investment in your soil bank account. I absolutely know and understand that this is a little bit labor intensive and that it's going to take some time and energy to be doing all of this. But again, we're doing this and it's going to result in a better finished compost product for our gardens, and that's ultimately going to help our plants thrive and grow even better. So by spending a little bit more time and energy on really collecting good materials and then breaking them down into a really easy compostable state, ultimately it's going to just result in you having an even better finished compost product. So future you in 6 or 8 or 9 months from now that's using this compost and looking at it thinking, oh my God, this is absolutely beautiful compost, is going to be thanking present you that took the time and energy to break that compost down into a really nice and usable state. So as you chop these materials down, you can be simultaneously combining them to actually begin building your compost pile. And what you want to be aiming for is about a mix of 50% nitrogen materials and 50% carbon materials. So all that you do is grab some of your nitrogen materials, such as those sunflower stems and leaves, and you could be chopping them up directly into your compost pile. And then once you've maybe put down 3 or 4 or 5 inches worth of that nitrogen material, you're then going to grab your leaves, your carbon source, and then you can put the same amount, say 3, 4, or 5 inches of that carbon material into the pile. And you're going to repeat this process of chopping up your materials, adding a layer of nitrogen materials, followed by adding a layer of carbon materials until you've gone through all of the materials that you have on hand. Continue just going back and forth like that, and you're going to create a really, really great and balanced compost product. And now as each week goes by, it's likely that you're going to have new kind of scraps coming out of your kitchen, new waste coming out of your garden that you're going to be putting into your compost. And this is why it's really nice to have that kind of like excess supply of carbon materials such as leaves available to you, because now you can just simply, again, break those down really quickly and then pop them into your compost and then throw in a little bit of leaves as well. And it's going to stay as a really nice pile that you're going to be working and building there. And just a quick note on composting structures at this point. As you can see, I've been adding all of these into just a black composting bin. And to be honest, the structure that you utilize matters very, very little. So you could utilize something like this or a compost tumbler. Those would be totally fine options. Or you could go down the path of something much larger, like a 3-bin composting system, which is what I have in my yard as well. Or you could even just utilize some paneling and build that into a little bit of like a column. Or you could even just grab some metal paneling from your local hardware store and then just bend that into like a little bit of a column, and that's going to keep all of the compost in one place. But to be honest, you don't even need any of that. You could just put this as a big pile right on the dirt and it's still going to break down and do its thing. So don't worry at all about the composting structure. Put all of your time, all of your energy into making sure that you're collecting good materials, breaking them down. Everything that we've covered in the first few steps here, those are far, far, far more important than the structure that you are utilizing. And so now I have my compost pile. It's got all kinds of great materials in it. They're broken down. And so regardless of which structure you utilize, we've now combined all of our materials. We've broken them down. Our pile is in a really, really great place to begin breaking down. But as I mentioned earlier, you've probably had that experience where you walk by a compost pile and it just smells absolutely awful. This is because it has ran out of oxygen. And so step 4 is to flip your pile. And the way that we fix this is just every few weeks, you're gonna head out to your composting bin or setup, and you're just simply going to dig a pitchfork in or a shovel in and flip the entirety of the pile. So that could be into another pile right beside it, or it could be into another bin. And what this is doing is that it's adding new oxygen into the pile so that all those microorganisms and microbes that are living and breathing getting in there and breaking down our pile, that they're getting new fresh oxygen so that they can continue working away on breaking down that pile. And once again, I know that this could look like and sound like a little bit of work, but it is a really great investment to be making in your soil bank account and ensuring that your plants have the absolute best environment to be thriving. And the second piece to this is that I know a lot of people who find ultimately flipping their compost pile to be incredibly relaxing and therapeutic. So you might be like, oh, that looks like a little bit of work, but trust me, go out there, give it a try. There's something just about how mindless it is, how easy it is to do, that allows our mind just kind of relax and unwind a little bit. I have a feeling that you're going to really enjoy actually flipping your compost pile, as silly as it may sound right now. So once you've flipped the entirety of your pile, it's going to be looking just like the pile, beforehand. It's just that now it's gotten new air, new oxygen introduced into it. And so the kind of fifth and final step that we need to think through is to stop adding to your pile. And remember, on this front, compost is just decomposed organic matter. And so if we were to continue adding new kitchen scraps, new garden waste into this pile, well, those are brand new. They haven't broken down at all. And so ultimately our pile would always have new, fresh kind of organic matter in it that hasn't yet decomposed. And so at a certain point in time, you need to stop adding to this pile and then begin creating a new pile so that our original pile can fully break down and turn into finished compost. And there isn't any exact set time or kind of like guidance on when to go about stop adding to your pile. But what I would encourage is that if your compost pile is starting to get fairly full, let's say that's at about 3/4 of the way full, then go ahead and stop adding to that pile and begin creating a new pile. Because what that's going to do is allow that first pile to continue breaking down as it just takes time and as you flip it to introduce new oxygen, and then simultaneously your new pile is going to begin building and developing and breaking down. And at a certain point, we would stop adding to that pile as well. And this is where you start getting into that really beautiful composting cycle where you're going to end up with really great finished compost available to you at all points in time. And that leads us to kind of just the final point for today, which is when do you know that your compost is ready to begin utilizing? So after you have finished adding to your pile, it is now going to just start breaking down and working towards being in a finished state. And the rule of thumb that you want to be looking for to know that it is ready to be utilized is that when you open up your compost and you look at it, it should both look and smell like the forest floor. So when we think about the forest floor, there's all kinds of just organic matter that has been falling in there and decomposing over time. That's very similar to what we're doing and creating with our compost pile here. And so all that you need to do is open it up, take a look, and if it looks, feels, and smells like the forest floor, then you have successfully made absolutely amazing compost to be applying to your garden. So at that point in time, simply grab your wheelbarrow, get a whole bunch of shovel loads worth of compost into that wheelbarrow, take it over to your garden, apply it. Your plants are going to absolutely love you for that. And best of all, again, this whole process, all the materials that you put in there, those don't cost you a single thing. You're literally creating black gold in your backyard. So you now have all the information that you need in order to create really amazing compost at home. So I really encourage you to try it out because your plants are going to absolutely love it. And again, you're going to be turning waste material into black gold. So give it a try, go get your hands dirty, and I'll catch you on the next lesson. See you then.